Tim Windsor, welcome to the Amplifyr Podcast.
Oh, Aidan, it's so good to be here. And by the way, Aidan, welcome to the Uncommodified Podcast.
Thank you, Tim. It's so good to be here.
We're going to cross-release this so my audience gets to hear Aidan not talking about family, or maybe.
Yep.
And then, why am I here?
You are here because you're an interesting guy with a lot of interesting business experience. So the Amplifyr Podcast, for anyone that doesn't know, is at the intersection of sales, marketing, leadership, pricing, anything in there, running a business, being an entrepreneur, that type of thing, and just chatting. A lot of the episodes so far, I'm still kind of figuring out what the Amplifyr Podcast is, but a lot of the episodes so far have just been chatting with people with interesting jobs, particularly, when on the sales, marketing, leadership side of things, and just learning about their experience from that. So,
well, just so you know, I'm almost like 200 episodes into Uncommodified, and I'm still trying to figure out what it is as well. So just so you know, you've got a few more episodes to go, so don't worry about it. Just try to figure it out, and don't really figure it out. It'll find its zone.
I love it. Well, yeah, I'm about to hit double digits episodes finally.
Look at you.
We're getting there.
You're like a young adult.
I know. We're getting there. All right. So, Tim, I want to know the origin story of how Tim became Tim. So tell us, first of all, for anyone that doesn't know what you do, how would you describe what you do? And particularly, how did you get into it?
Okay. First of all, when I saw this question originally, I was like, do you want to know how I was conceived?
Yeah.
And I was like, no, that's probably not what Aidan wants to know. At least not on this podcast. Well, maybe on the other side of Uncommodified, we can talk about that. So leave that to your imaginations, people. So for me, I did come from an entrepreneurial family. My dad was very entrepreneurial, although it was a difficult journey for him because his parents were divorced when he was in high school, and my dad had to drop out of school to take care of his mom. And so my dad was very intelligent. In fact, he was mayor for the day in our community when he was in high school. And then he went into business, but he always wanted to own his own business, and that never happened. My brothers were also entrepreneurs. I have three other brothers. Two of them were also very entrepreneurial. And so I think part of it is I was raised in that kind of environment. I think some of it for me too was I don't think I was ever going to be a great employee. I don't really take instruction well some days.
You give a lot of instruction.
I love to give instructions. Absolutely. I learned this from my wife. She's very good at it as well. So I was just like, I just had this idea about wanting to do business, and I had an opportunity in my mid-teens. One of my brothers who had a business, he needed some help, and that was a home building business and drafting and design. And so he taught me I learned to draft homes when I was 14.
Okay.
He taught me how to draft, and I was drafting homes and helping him build homes and do renovation when I was 15, 16 years old. And that led to a business with him, which, by the way, unless you're really good at working with your family, I don't recommend it because we damn near killed each other, and they decided eventually this wasn't working. But then that led me to the other businesses that I had, which ultimately became the business that I have now. But other than about 3 years in all of my life, I've worked for myself. So, maybe a serial entrepreneur or just maybe a serial psychopath or somewhere in between those two. I don't know. But that's been my journey, and I've loved it. I'm still trying to figure it out. I still haven't quite figured it out. And that's okay with me. I really love the journey. So that's sort of how I ended up in the journey. The journey's taken lots of different evolutions or evolutionary periods to it because it's been an evolving and ever-evolving form, and maybe it'll continue to do so.
Okay, so being an entrepreneur is not necessarily for everyone. So you said, with the exception of maybe about 3 years there, you've always worked for yourself. Were you ever tempted to take up a job? Was there any particularly rough period where you thought, oh, maybe owning a business is not for me and I should just, get an old ball and chain?
Yeah, so I think there's been lots of times if I'm going to be honest, there's been times where I was like, you know what, this would be a lot simpler if I just worked for somebody. Although I'm not sure it would really be that much more simpler. It might feel like it's more stable and it might feel like it has more of a guarantee, but I would challenge that proposition. I actually don't believe that. I think particularly look at where we are in society today. I think this idea that just having a 9-to-5 job and having a job where you you most likely don't even have a pension anymore, you may have benefits. I mean, I've never had, other than 3 years of my life, we've never had benefits. We've self-funded benefits all of our life. But I think that security is a bit of a myth. It's a bit of smoke and mirrors. And so I think the problem is a lot of people think, well, entrepreneurialism is a lack of security. It's this sort of free fall and you're not sure. And they juxtapose that to position that if I'm an employee, it eradicates all of that. I would fundamentally disagree with that. It probably was never true. It might have seemed true before because of the constructs around security in our society. I think most people today recognize the tremendous vulnerability we all have to forces that are wholly and solely beyond our control.
Yeah, COVID definitely would have shown us that.
And lots of other things that are happening now that we shall not speak of.
Fair enough. That's fair. So when it comes to the business that you currently run right now, I guess I'm interested to hear you kind of talk about, when I think of Tim Windsor, and feel free to correct this perspective, if you will, I think of Uncommodified and I think of Frevesco, and obviously then the man, the myth, the legend, somewhere in between there. Can you kind of like, what is the distinction? How did this kind of come about, this distinction between Uncommodified and Frevesco? Because I know from, you and I have worked together for many, many years and in a lot of different capacities, and I've at different times seen those lines blurred, and then other times they seem very separate and distinct. And I'm curious to understand from your perspective, why the distinction? When are they different? When are they the same thing? And where do you fit into all of that?
Sure. And I think, well, first of all, I'd like to say there's purpose and convention to this, but there isn't. So let's be fairly clear. If you're taking notes, don't take notes, because this is not the way to do it. But let's talk about the evolution. So Frevesco came before Uncommodified, but there was something before Frevesco. Okay. So how I ended up in the place I'm at today, I had an entrepreneurial idea, desire. I was in business with my brother, which I mentioned to you failed miserably because we almost killed each other.
Is this still like 14, 16, or is this later in life?
I was 19 years old when that business came to an end.
Okay.
And I almost broke a chair over his head in my dining room. So this is, if you're going to take one note, if you ever get to a point in a partnership that you want to break a chair over someone else out, it's probably time to exit. This is my best advice. All right. So I was like, this is done. I can't do this anymore. So it just so happened, and this is where I would say, first of all, I want to be really clear about the secret to my success. The secret to my success is unashamedly luck. Now, I believe that luck, like the philosopher Seneca said, that luck favors the prepared. I also sort of believe that luck is sort of like Arnold Palmer may have or may not have famously said, the more I practice, the luckier I get. So I do believe that luck is enabled or attracted by preparation and practice. But I also believe it's luck. And so my entrepreneurial journey that ultimately became everything that it is today, that part of it, that business journey, started because of luck. So Pam, my wife and I was married when I was 20. So now I was in my early 20s. And we had a friend who was a serial entrepreneur. In fact, he had brought Amway, the company Amway, into Germany and started it from scratch. So he was very wealthy, very just an amazing businessman. And we met him at a time in his life where he was older, and they had moved back to Canada where they were from, and that's where we met him. And he had a small boutique sort of marketing business. And that business was a business that actually produced products for the tourist industry. And some people remember this or even see them still. So you would go to a gas station, and on the side of the wall in the gas station would be a sort of a plastic sort of acrylic board with a map. Okay. And then around it would be advertising, and you'd find, well, that was his business in Canada. And he had built that business up and he ran it quite successfully. But at this point in his life, he was beginning to deal with early onset Parkinson's. And so it had was crippling him physically, beginning to, emotionally, physically. And so he had to basically put a pause in his business. So his business had become nothing, a real shell. Everybody had employed, all had left, and it was just sitting there. We had encountered them at this point in their life, and they were on their way of exiting Ontario, where we lived. They were going to move back to BC, having a home built. And the closings did not line up, and they were basically in a position where they didn't have a house. And so Pam and I offered our home to them for them to come and live with us for 6 months. And so they did that. And during this time, Lee Penner was his name. He really, his health began to diminish tremendously. And it was really sad to watch. At the end of it, they wanted to give us money for staying at our house, and I didn't want to receive money. So Lee said to me, well, Tim, I have this shell of this business. I think you probably could be good at it. What if I gave it to you? So he effectively gave me this company, which was called Impact Media at the time. And at that time, I was working for someone else at this point in my career. I was actually a business manager at a car dealership. I was 21 years old. I had started in the car business because I loved selling. I sold a ton of cars the first 3 months that I worked. I sold 32 cars the first month.
That's insane.
That I sold cars. I had a great sales manager who effectively said, I'm going to teach you the secret of this business. He said, if you want to sell cars, you have to find customers. And he threw a white pages down on my desk, if the people remember a white pages, and it went, and he said, there's a lot of people in there who need cars, start calling.
Just a phone book, just saying, just
white pages.
Open to.
So I started cold calling people, and he gave me a script, and the script was, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I'm Tim Windsor from, it was Hyundai dealership, Alpine Hyundai. I'm just wondering, are you or anybody that you know looking for a new car? Because if you are, I would love an opportunity to speak to you. And I started making calls, and by, I got people said, oh, it's funny you would call. Actually, our car just broke down. We need a new car. I said, would you consider? Oh, yeah. And I sold 32 cars the first month and went on after that. And then I became the business manager. And that owner who owned that also owned the largest Ford dealership in our community. And so at 21, I was financing $750,000 worth of cars in the early 80s. So I had a great job. I was making $70,000 a year in the early 80s as a business manager. So Lee Penner gives me this business that's a shell. And I say to my lovely wife, who has always entertained my ridiculous requests, you know what? I'm going to quit and see what I can do with this business. So I up and quit, left the job. We didn't have kids yet. And I resurrected that business. And so my first business was that marketing business, and I spun off some other products for the tourist industry, but most of the products we created were for the tourist industry, and we were in a small town. We were in Kitchener in Ontario. One of the products I started was competing directly with a magazine product of the largest publisher in the area, and I was starting to take some market share. And so I got a call from the president of that publishing company and said, hey, Tim, I got 2 opportunities for you. And I said, what's that? His name was Peter. He said, well, one is I put you out of business because you're a nuisance. Or 2, you come to work for me. And I was like, oh, I'll come to work with you. So I started working for him, and I started selling advertising, and I became the publisher of a business magazine within about 3 months. And I published that business magazine. And then that led me on a series of journeys, and I decided after a while I didn't want to do that, and I got back into marketing. And I loved marketing even though I didn't know a lot about it, and so I resurrected the next generation of that company, and it became a company called Thinkers Marketing. And for me, it was just all about thinking different or creatively or whatever. Sounded like a good idea at the beginning. And so I founded this company, and I started doing primarily cost-saving marketing consulting in the beginning.
Okay.
So I wanted to figure a way to earn money very quickly. And so I charged customers. I did cost-saving marketing projects where I could look at their marketing. Maybe it was direct mail they were doing and cut their savings back when we did direct mail, lots of direct mail. And I would charge them 50% of the savings year one and nothing after that. But that meant sometimes within a month I could make 40 grand. Okay. So I got involved in that. And then I began to realize as I was working more with more customers that their marketing problems were actually not marketing problems. They often were sales problems. Mm-hmm. And so I started to getting interested in selling and how selling works. and started reading and teaching myself. I have a high school degree, so I'm not that I'm relatively uneducated, but I'm educated in different ways. I like to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened was I started barreling into that area of sales and really loved it, and realized that I had some creative ways of looking at it, some benefit. And then I began to realize also, though, that sales problems were often leadership problems.
Mm-hmm.
Sales leadership or business leadership problems. And so that led me on a journey over a number of years, from marketing and marketing consulting to sales and sales consulting and training to leadership and leadership consulting coaching, because the source or the epicenter of a lot of those problems were actually poor leadership and poor strategic leadership decisions.
Mm.
So that began my journey, and the evolution of that eventually was the company went from being Fervesco, or for thinkers, which is marketing. Fervesco in Latin means to bring to boil or to ignite. And at that time I was really interested, and I had developed some material that I called Ignite. And so Fervesco then became the next sort of generation of thinkers. Legally speaking, today, my business still legally is Thinkers.
Interesting.
Never changed the name. So Fervesco became a doing business as, and then Uncommodified showed up because as I was doing a lot of consulting, particularly because I had the lucky good fortune again of being introduced to people at Moen Canada, the faucet company. And in 2002, I started doing sales training at Moen Canada. And for a 13-year period, I worked with Moen Canada. I did sales training on every side of their business. I did leadership training, executive training. And during that time, I was challenged because they were a highly commoditized industry. I mean, you can buy a faucet anywhere. Mm-hmm. So I began to think about how do you take a market or a product that is highly commoditized, and how do you uncommodify it? That's where the first terms of uncommodified came from. So it was really a very functional, structural conversation about how do you add value beyond the thing you sell. And then I began to come to the conclusion that in that journey that commodities are not just highly available faucets. They're not just coffee and copper. Mm-hmm. That a commodity by dictionary definition is anything easily and readily available in multiple places. That's the definition. So therefore, I started to think, well, then everything's a commodity at some level, including, by the way, ideas and ideologies, including the things that, that don't seem to be products. Mm-hmm. So then I began to say, well, what if uncommodification or being uncommodified, what if it's the secret? Hmm. What if it's actually the macro secret to everything in life? What if it isn't just about business? What if it's about life? What if it's about calling forth the uniqueness of who we were created to be, not just the products or services that we're creating? And that got into my head. And when things get into my head, they go into a very strange place. And I begin to ruminate. And so out of that, I started to do some one-off seminars and training called Uncommodified.
I didn't know that. Okay.
And that's where the term started to latch. But then it started to grow a life of its own. And this is, the journey you're talking about. So Uncommodified started to take over my psyche. It became so much of everything I wanted to talk about, what I found intriguing. And I found myself wanting to move more and more in that direction. So Uncommodified began to find its way and was sort of birthed as a more of a technical term. Probably also aided, I like to read a lot, and that's where I've learned. But I was reading a book at the time by, I think the author is Nassim Taleb, phenomenal author. And the book is called The Black Swan Effect. And he also wrote another book called Anti-Fragility, which is a powerful book.
I feel like I've heard that title.
That's a great book because his idea isn't, see, we think about something being fragile or non-fragile. His idea is, what if we could create structures that were anti-fragile, meaning the worse they were shaken, the stronger they got. His image was, if you have a glass and you put it in a box, and you make it and you mark it non-fragile, it's because you've insulated it with something to keep it from breaking. Mm-hmm. He said, but what if you could create such an environment where in fact, every time you took the glass and threw it on the ground, it became stronger to resist shattering? That's anti-fragile. So I was playing around with these strange ideas about anti-fragility, and because of the reading I was doing with him, and things like the black swan effect, which is these black swan events that happen that change the world or change markets. His whole book is about how do you predict them.
How do you predict them?
And how do you actually take advantage of them? So I was reading all this sort of really crazy stuff, and this all then became an amalgam of Uncommodified. And it so began to eclipse in some ways. And then I thought it sounds like an interesting brand. I'll do something with it. Of course, the first thing I did is bought uncommodified.com because you got to have the URL.
I respect you're one of my friends that when you have a brilliant idea, like me, you're like, I got to go buy that URL.
I got to buy the URL. So that's how this whole thing sort of evolved. But that's my story.
I love it.
But hold on, wait a second.
Okay.
Because remember, this isn't just about me, and I've just taken up half the podcast chatting about myself. Okay, so how about you? I mean, you've gone through lots of iterations of Aidan.
Yeah.
Like, are you on like version 6.2 or where are you?
That feels like answering what is the Amplifyr Podcast at all, which feels very much like a work in progress, if I'm being quite honest. So if I was more intelligent, I would have thought you might ask this question. I would have rehearsed an answer. So you're gonna get a very off the cuff answer.
Perfect.
I don't know, man. Like I for as long as I can remember, I feel like I've been a person with lots of big ideas and big dreams. I know when I was in, I feel like 6th grade or something like that, I had it in my head that I was going to be like a full-time musician. I was going to be a rock star. I was going to be in a band. We were going to hit it big. And that was my career aspirations. And so when my parents would tell me to go do my homework, I'm like, I don't need to worry about that. I'm going to be a musician. It's fine. And they were like, maybe just have a backup plan. Like, it's okay if you want to be a musician, but a decent plan B is not a bad idea. So that was kind of where that started. And I mean, I grew up in a small town, Walkerton, Ontario. I really, really wanted to get out of there. So Toronto, again, was like, it was a big dream. And I didn't even end up going to Toronto, whatever. Life kind of took me a little bit of a different way. But I feel like for a long, long time, I've had crazy ideas, and for better or worse, I indulge them, or I at least contemplate them. I mean, even meeting my wife, when I first met Leanne, she's 4 years older than me, which is not a big deal when you're in your 30s like I am now. But when I was 18 and she was 22, I was starting college and she had finished college. That was a much bigger gap, right? And so I had thought, well, I have no chance with this woman anyways. Woman, not girl. I was like, I got no chance with her anyways. I might as well be crazy and throw myself out there. And sure enough, here we are 14 years later, 4 kids later, and 11 and a half years of marriage. So, I feel like I've always had lots of crazy ideas. And so even, and then a lot of the very, very good things in my life can be traced back to my wife in one way or another. So the first job I had out of college was with your son, Chris, who's a great guy who I have a lot of love.
By the way, he's a great guy because of his mother. Just Pam, I just want you to know that I'm saying this on the podcast.
It's being recorded.
It's
there you
Pam.
Go. There you go. You can quote that now forever, Pam. He had called me. I had done his wedding photography, and he had called me up and he said, hey, I got this job at this company and we need photos of our products. And it was, concrete finishing equipment. He's like, I know that's not portraiture or weddings, but are you interested? It would probably pay you well. And I was a broke college student and I had like cold feet and I was like, nah, I'm definitely going to pass on this. And Leanne's like, Aidan, you're very broke. You're about to graduate college. We could use the money. And so I was like, okay, sounds good. And so I tried that. And that went really well. And then that turned into, he needed a freelance graphic designer, which turned into a, hey, can you come on staff? And so it was a lot of saying yes to things and trying out some of those things that scared me and were very much on the edge of what I was comfortable with. And so, I worked for Chris for 2 years before I went out on my own as a wedding photographer. And I did that for 5 years full time. And in and among all of that, I realized that the skills that I was gaining to run and market my own small business were transferable. I could pass those skills along to other people as well. And so I had started working with friends and colleagues and different people that I had met that had businesses, and started sharing what I knew about marketing and so on with them. And so that then turned into some income for me, which was very needed during COVID. And then I had lost touch with Chris at some point in and among there. And then him and I had reconnected, and he offered me another job, and that was in marketing. And so that was another felt scary to say yes to thing. I was quite happy being self-employed. It was during COVID though, and the COVID years were quite stressful for small business owners. So it felt like the more intelligent decision to say yes to that. I think at this point, I had 2 kids, and so I was like, okay, I can provide some much needed stability. After having been through most of COVID, right? And so, anywho, the repeating theme here, I guess, is really just like kind of crazy or scary idea, trying it out and being like, what's the worst that can happen? I can always pause, pivot, change course, right? And that idea, even of pausing, pivoting, changing course, has been, I think, especially something that I think a lot about in the past couple of years, like trying lots of different things, Doghouse Design Studio, where I'm doing, bespoke graphic design stuff, starting my own podcast finally, talking about business and leadership. I've had a blog for years and things like that. I've written a book, which is cool, another weird thing. That's the first time I've said that on camera.
Coming soon to a store near you,
online
available to purchase to support Aidan's children.
Yeah. Please.
Shameless plug.
Please.
Well, hold on. I want to stop you for a second. I'm going to interrupt you, host.
All right.
Okay. I'm going to tell everybody the B side of this story.
Okay.
Aidan forgot something.
What did I forget?
So when Chris came at him a second time to want to hire him, Aidan was like, I'm not taking that job. I don't want to work in that industry. And at the same time, this is where moments come together, like some kind of star alignment. I was doing consulting for a company that was in the same industry that my son was working in. And I needed to hire a videographer to do a project who had mad skills. So I racked my pea brain and said, who do I know who's got mad skills? And I had an epiphany. I was like, Bob does, and he's not available. No, it wasn't Bob. I was like, Aidan Hennebry. So I call up Aidan. I'm like, hey, I got this project for you. And he's like, oh yeah. I said, I do videography. I'm like, so then remember you came and did this project.
Absolutely,
So you didn't tell the B side. So the part of this project had me touring Aidan around to a bunch of different branch locations for this company where he was going to shoot video. And one day, Aidan confesses to me, Chris is on me to come work in this business. Why would I want to come in this industry? And I told you the powerful tale of water. This was the water industry, and how water is the elixir of life, and how we can be part of help. And I believe I helped push you into the arms
absolutely
of my son.
100%.
But Chris Windsor, if you're listening, I never got the money for that, by the way. I want the money.
The commission.
So the
referral fee.
The B side of this story is that I was the one serendipitously. It just happened that you were on that project, and then Chris offered you. And by the way, I hadn't spoken to Chris, so I didn't know he was doing this in the background, doing his magic. So I'm going to take a little part of that.
Oh,
journey,
absolutely. Well, my perspective,
that's the B side
on that lunch is a little bit different.
Okay,
not too much different, but I think in a way you'll find humorous because. Yeah, I was excited. I'd reconnected with Chris, and at this point, I think I was already doing some freelance work for the company he was working for, again, where he was trying to bring me on staff. So I was already doing a little bit there. You had, contracted me to do a video project for the company you were working with. When we were shooting that day, I knew it was a full day shoot, and I knew at some point I'm going to have to stop and go to lunch. And sure enough, the gentleman that you are, you said, and I'll take you to lunch. Don't worry. And I said, okay, I'll get the bill. And you, of course not, I'll get the bill. And I was scared because we sat down. I think we'd finished ordering our drinks, placed our order for lunch. And I feel like the first thing out of your mouth was, so when are you going to start working for Chris? Just straight to the point.
Probably was.
And that was the question that I absolutely did not want to answer, but I knew that you were going to ask it. And so I don't know that I had a really great answer for you, but I I remember that. And so I can tell you the honest truth that for the next number of years, every week when I would drive by the restaurant where we had lunch, I would look at that place and I would think of you and I would think of that conversation, just so you know. So for years on end now.
Okay, high five.
I have attributed that to
this is the story that's all the things which I love about the story. But the thing I want to go back to the connection for me to the entrepreneurial journey and everything else. So I think one of the challenges for people is that, and I think in life in general, we tend to draw straight lines between where we are and where we want to be. We do it in our mind. We do it in our strat plans. We do it in our business proposals that we write to get bank funding. We do it when we tell our partner that we want to leave our job. We draw a straight line from, I'm here now, but look where I'll be. And what I've learned over life is there are no straight lines.
Yep.
There's a reason why maybe in nature that rivers are not straight.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the thing that I would want to just pause and maybe remind people of, you could be beginning your entrepreneurial journey. You could be in it for lots of years. You could frankly have been in it and now you're out of it. First, as long as you're moving towards who you want to be and where you want to be, then you're moving in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it in that order. As long as you're moving towards who you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
What you want to do and where you want to be in life and finances, in my opinion, comes secondary. So if being an entrepreneur or being an employee takes you more towards where you want to be, that's great. But if it doesn't take you towards who you want to be, then I think it's the wrong journey. Because I think that's the reality is when you show up fully present, when you show up as yourself, when you show up as your most uncommodified self, shameless plug, and the book is available also on my website
and online retailer
and also on Amazon and 350 other online retailers globally. Shameless plug. Then I think you win. And if that's taking you solely into entrepreneurship, great. If it's taking you into being an employee, that's great as well. As long as it's taking you more wholly into the wholeness and truth of who you are and who you want to be. Because anything else is a horrible compromise that we'll regret at some point. And and I'm a little older than you are, Aidan. I just turned 60. My wife just turned 65. We're officially seniors now. I get seniors coffee, which I really appreciate. My wife is a full-fledged senior, so I ride that discount and put it away wet. I love it. I go, she's a senior. My wife hates it. I go, do you have a seniors discount? So we're seniors. But what I'm realizing is the best thing for me about my own personal journey is that it's always led me into a greater expression of who I am, not away from that. And so I would fundamentally make a terrible employee, but partly because I'm not sure I could fully be who I am and do that. Not because being an employee is bad, but I have a unique wiring towards independence. I have a unique wiring towards, I was a solopreneur for most of my business. Although that's a bit different today. I have some other people who work with me and for me, but I was a solopreneur. I've done this on my own and I kept it small for reasons. So, again, this is where we have choices to make, again, if we're going to be real true to marketing and sales podcasts, we should be talking about, scalability. You got to scale. Maybe. For me to scale my business when it was really finding its own as a training, coaching, consulting business, I would have had to quantify and codify and package the training material I was doing, and then I would have had to, like a lot of other companies do, and it's not wrong, it's just their journey. Then you go out and hire a bunch of facilitators, and they sell your program, and they facilitate it. But that literally made me want to vomit. That just wasn't for me. I could have made a ton more money over the years, tons more money. But working customized, boutique, bespoke, not having a canned way of looking at everything. I approached my business more, thinking it more like train tracks, where I philosophically have a sense of how I do have a gift of seeing where a business is or a sales system or process and help them understand based on where they want to go, what tracks to lay. But now the train is very different. It might have this car first or this car first or that car first. So this is why I don't do off-the-shelf programs. So I create bespoke programs which have I mean, again, you're not reinventing the fundamentals of leadership every time you do a program.
Of course not.
But the language that we use becomes highly customizable to the ecosystem that we're in. The problems we're solving are their problems. So we can weave all this in a very boutique, bespoke way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so that's been what I've enjoyed most, because it allows for there to be authenticity and uniqueness even in the product that we ultimately sell or the service that we sell. And that makes it work for me. And so again, but that's not everybody's journey. And it's not wrong to have a homogeneous, quite ubiquitous product. That's not wrong. But it's wrong if it's wrong for you. And if all you're doing is going out and finding some social media person to follow and you're just going to emulate them and mimic them because you believe that's going to give you success, my strong provocation to anyone listening is, it could give you a lot of money. But be careful that you don't equate that with success.
Absolutely.
Because you will trade yourself. I mean, there's an ancient text that says you can gain the whole world but lose your soul.
I was just going to say it, yeah.
Yeah, and listen, you get one soul. And once you compromise yourself internally, it's hard to recover. Because once you do it once, you'll do it again. And once you do it again, you'll do it always. And those compromises that we make along the way, again, can turn profit, can seem wise in the moment. But the long-term exposure and cost of that, again, now as a 60-year-old, I would say to people, it's not worth it. You will believe it's worth it. You will even think it's worth it when you live in your $1 million house. But one day you're going to wake up and realize that those compromises were fundamental schisms that you really hard to cover up with some putty and duct tape.
This is one of the things that I've always found the most compelling about the way that you approach business, leadership, sales, marketing, all these things is anyone tuning in the middle of this episode would hardly know that this is that we are sales and marketing guys, right? You wouldn't know that because what you do, and I think, one of the many millions of things that I've gleaned from you over the years is to understand that underneath all of these business problems and decisions and things are human decisions and problems and things. And that fundamentally, that is where these decisions are made, right? I famously quote you for saying that, a given business does not exist. The people within that exist. If the people left tomorrow, the business would not continue operating. That's not how it works, right? And so to take such a human approach to business, I think, is such a unique lens that so many people fail to do, I guess.
Well, yeah, and I think it's even harder now. I mean, again, maybe there's going to come a time where we're all buying our stuff but with Elon's robots and there are no people anymore. I don't know. Maybe that's going to happen. Could be an interesting world. I'm not sure I want to be here, but it could be interesting. But until and unless that happens, at most levels, businesses still involve human interchange. Particularly probably people who are thinking who are entrepreneurs or small entrepreneurs. And I've always said that this is the deceptive nature again of what we do, and this is as marketers, as marketing consultants, as sales professionals, whatever. I think we got to be careful we don't sort of swallow our own message too much.
What do you mean by that?
And what I mean by that is that we talk in structural terms in marketing. We talk about, is this B2C? Is this B2B? And then of course everybody knows what that is. This is business to consumer or business to business. And to your point, I've always said that's the fundamental problem. This actually is H to H. It's human to human. And when you get that right, then everything else can fall in place. When you get that wrong, you think that you're convincing consumers when you're actually convincing Sally, Bob, or Frank. You can think that your target market is, 30-year-old, Anglo-Saxons, when in fact it's Bob, Sally, or Frank, who don't always fit into a nice commercialized target market box, apparently, although that's what we'd like to think it is. So I really believe this is important, but I also think it's important about running our business, because then we have deep integrity. We have deep appreciation and respect for the people who work hard in our business. We understand that people succeed and fail, businesses don't. We understand that the high risk, high reward game we play as entrepreneurs is not with a business, but it's with people. It's with ourselves, our families. But if we ever have the privilege of having other employees, and we hold a sacred covenant, obligation potentially, that we often don't think about. And so I think the dehumanization of business is problematic. And I think when we humanize it, we become so much better and smarter at so many things. That's again, that if you're listening, you don't have to believe that. You know, if by the way, if you're listening on Amplifyr, the podcast Amplifyr, then you're hearing it through that lens. If you're listening it on the Uncommodified Podcast, you're listening it through that lens. I would say to my own listeners that, you know, I always say you're listening for a reason. And one of the reasons you're listening is you should not adopt a structural, improper viewpoint to look at the world through. Your business, your life, your community group. It doesn't matter. Organizations don't exist. When I call into, I called into Rogers the other day, and I got terrible customer service. Sorry, Rogers. And but Rogers didn't answer the phone. Ted Rogers surely didn't answer, and no other person. Maybe the person I was speaking was Rodriguez Rogers, potentially. But the reality is, I get terrible customer service because I get terrible advice from another human. By the way, that doesn't make the human terrible. More than likely makes them ill-equipped. But I didn't encounter the business. I encountered people. And unless that changes, I think every entrepreneur, every sales and marketing professional ought not to forget that. That's my strong provocation. You can think that's nonsense if you want. I think if you think it's nonsense, I think you're wrong. And I think that is a fundamental error that will cause you to do things or expect things that are unreasonable and unnatural.
This is what I think will be interesting to see about how AI continues to impact every aspect of business life, quite frankly, is I do think that it is going to, I hope anyways, maybe this is overly optimistic, but I hope that it will increase our respect for the human component of just about everything. Because when you have computers, robots, algorithms, whatever, that can do everything perfectly, instantaneously, and give you libraries of information without even thinking about it, like there's so much that gets lost in there, right? And even Doghouse Design Studio, my hand-drawn graphic design kind of side project, I've intentionally for the past year or two really leaned into hand-drawn, messy, imperfect, human things that bear the marks of its maker. And rather than, I used to start graphic design on the computer, that it was completely digital. I used a mouse and a keyboard. Now I start with I still use digital tools, my Apple Pencil and my iPad, but nonetheless, it's my hand that is drawing these lines, that is making these shapes, that is doing these things. And I have embraced that wholeheartedly because I love the things that are kind of imperfect and kind of messed up. And, even my Amplifyr podcasting studio, there, like, the philosophy goes deep on all of this. I love that it's shot with iPhones and it's kind of janky, and there's no man behind the curtain. I am the man behind the curtain here. It is one guy running everything, right? That is both stressful and beautiful, and it's fun and it's exciting and it's thrilling, and things go wrong and you correct for, but like that human aspect of everything that we do, I think, I hope that with the advent of AI, we will revalue the human aspect of things, and then especially so in business. I can't remember which. Oh, it was the sales book. Are you
pointing to my book? Oh no, just kidding. Uncommodified?
Available on Amazon.
On Amazon.
Go to your website and buy the website. Signed copy.
Uncommodified.com.
The book, there's a lot of business books on the shelf behind you, which are all great books. I'm looking for, I think it was Jeb Blunt's, is it Jeb Blunt? Is it, oh gosh, it's about closing deals.
Jeb. That's
is it Jeb?
Yeah.
Why can't I find
Or
what
it's
one it
Anthony.
is?
It's either Anthony.
It's Anthony. That's what it is.
I can't say his last name.
The Lost Art of Closing.
What's his last name?
Anarino. You just drop the I.
I can't say that guy's
Anthony
name.
Anarino.
I just say Anthony, my man Anthony.
The Lost Art of Closing. So it's 10-ish chapters, amazing chapters, all about how to close deals as a salesperson. And one of the last chapters in there to me that I found like hit me like a hammer in the face. The whole book is amazing, but the last chapter I thought was hilarious because the entire book teaches you about systems and processes and repeatable things. So, you being a car salesman, right? And then one of the last chapters before he finishes the book is, but don't forget that people buy from people. And so, it doesn't mean you have to be absolutely the most likable guy ever, but don't be an a-hole. Don't be someone that people hate. And remember that at the end of the day, they are buying from you and you are a part of the equation, and don't undervalue that. Everything else I just said is still valid and valuable, but don't underestimate the aspect that you as an individual bring to the sales deals that you have. And so I don't think he meant to undo the entire book's worth of argumentation that he did. And if anything, it enhances it. But to me, it just stood in such stark contrast to the rest of the book of like, don't take your eyes off the prize. Don't forget that at the end of the day, a human being is on both sides of the equation. And it might be a couple of human beings on both sides of the equation or what have you, but don't forget that there's a human there,
And you know what I love about that? I think what he's doing, he is pointing out the wisdom of paradox. And so, and by the way, my son Chris and I are working on a new book on this subject.
This is good because I was going to ask you what's coming next.
On a subject, but we'll get to it later. But so we're working on a new book about the paradoxes of sales success. So, and by the way, it's been very hard. We're struggling to get it written because we're both very busy and trying to figure out our life. Plus, I decided to write another book in the middle of it, which wasn't a good idea. So, great way to waylay a project, start another project. But I will say that he's pointing out the wisdom of paradox. So it isn't a neither or, it's a both and he's pointing out a paradoxical pull at the end of that book that needs to be maintained, which by the way is super wise, and it's why I love him as a writer, because most writers would not be willing to introduce at the end, because to your point, the danger is people think you just contradicted what you just said, but you didn't. A paradox is not a contradiction. It's different. And so I love the idea of paradox because it comes from the Greek, two smaller words, and it literally means to cast dice alongside. So when we think of paradox, or actually I'm wrong about that. I misspoke. That's parable. Anyways, that's for another podcast. You know what? But that leads into my next point. Embrace imperfection.
It's human.
Because I just screwed up. But it's okay. Listen to me. I'm gonna
So okay,
hold, stop for a second. You stop. Okay, this is my podcast now. I'm coming off. Okay, we were supposed to end this at 50 minutes because I have some technical requirements, but I have a proposition I'm going to make live.
All right.
Let's just keep it going and have the conversation as long as we want to have it, because I know you do longer format.
Sure.
And I'll just have my producers cut it into 2 episodes, part 1 and part 2.
Sounds interesting.
Because I think there's still lots to explore.
Absolutely.
And I do want to go back to a point that you're making earlier, and it tucks into what I just did. So for all you listening, I made a mistake. Paradox and parable are different, and parable means in Greek to cast dice alongside. So, but let's move away from that. Go back to something you said. This is the danger with AI is that it creates false sense of perfection. And I think that the entrepreneurial journey, I think in sales and marketing, we have to be reminded to embrace not perfection, but the process of evolution, of getting a little bit better.
Iteration.
Correct. And I think that the problem we're running into is that we're losing the wisdom of iteration. We can say it, we want it, it comes out relatively perfect first time, quickly. Time and percolation and iteration is important, and I think it's important in sales and marketing because it's only perfect in the pitch. It's only perfect in the boardroom. It's only perfect in the marketing meeting. It's not perfect when you get in the real world because you encounter forces you didn't understand. The wind is stronger. People are more resistant. The market wants to go in a different direction. Somebody tariffs the world. Things happen, right? So I do think that there's wisdom in what you were saying and about embracing our own imperfection, but the imperfection of the process. And that's hard, by the way, I think, when you're working with customers, because customers expect perfection out of the can. I think sometimes what customers want to buy from us if I think back to the days of when I was more on the marketing side, people wanted to buy a perfect campaign. I think that's a problem, because I think every good campaign is iterative. I think I think a campaign only fundamentally fails if we don't learn. Mm-hmm. So I would always want to invite people into experimentation. I actually believe, from a sales process perspective, one of the things when I talk about sales process, I have developed over the years some fairly, fundamental thinking and rigid thinking, yet flexible, around process. And I do believe that great salespeople and great sales process understands and has a part of it that's about experimentation. Mm-hmm. And I think we should openly invite our customer into experimentation, because at the end of the day, most of what we're doing is a well-placed hunch, if we're really honest. And so I think we should not lie to people about that. I think we should be honest. And I think we should invite our customers into experimentation.
What I'm curious about, so whether this is you training other sales, marketing leaders, what have you, to embrace experimentation, or whether I'm going to ask you very personally, you doing it in your own business as you work, especially with, leadership and executive level type people. Experimentation is risky and scary, at least to the average person, right? So I'm curious to know, from your perspective, how do you, as a salesperson or as a trainer of salesperson, however you want to interpret this, how do you remove or make comfortable the level of risk and dealing with, especially people with different risk tolerances, right? Because, someone like me, and certainly like you, if you've been a lifelong entrepreneur, you certainly have a higher tolerance for risk than I would say the average person. And again, I really like what you said, that's perceived risk. That's not actual risk, that, maybe a day job is not as stable as one might believe. But how, again, especially, I just think at a higher level, at companies and at the level that you generally tend to deal with, the risk feels scarier. This is my assumption. I'm making a lot of assumptions here. Risk feels scarier because the stakes are higher. Because if this doesn't go quite well, a lot of people could be hurt, or the company could be hurt, or we could do a lot of damage, right? How do you encourage your customers or your leaders or what have you to embrace risk, become comfortable with it, and so on?
So, wow, that's, I don't know. I need a cigar for that question and maybe a scotch. Great question. So first of all, I think part of the problem or challenge is I think the way we frame things is critically important.
Okay.
So if we juxtaposition, I have a decision, you have a decision, you can do something that is risky or something that has no risk. Well, you're going to choose the thing that has, quote, no risk. The thing is, I would propose that's not true. Everything has risk. So part of it has to do with framing the argument or the conversation. This is not a choice between do this risky thing or do this non-risky thing. It's do this risky thing or this risky thing. It starts there. So it's about reframing certainty.
Because inaction is also a form of risk.
Right. And inaction's a decision. See, it's not about, this is the other thing is, we say, do you want to make a decision? Well, a non-decision's a decision. So it's not about a decision or no decision, and it's not about risk or no risk. So part of this is becoming craftier, wiser, a little more cunning about the language frameworks we use. Because we actually predict a lot of our response and then blame it on the customer. Because we frame it in a construct that predicts our answer. So
unpack that.
Well, I believe fundamentally that our conversational framework, and more particularly our questions, and for those of you listening to the Amplifyr Podcast, it won't be the first time you've heard me say this, questions have a superpower. And that superpower is they both propel, they cause to happen, but they also predict the conversation. So you and I are having a conversation about risk mitigation or understanding because you asked me a question. I did not respond to your question and say, you know what? Well, it's so sad the Blue Jays didn't win the World Series. Because that'd be a stupid answer and a silly answer to your question about risk. So your question, in fact, has a superpower which can work for or against you. it propels or causes a response to want to be given, but it also predicts the response. So our conversational frameworks and the questions we ask actually predict our response. Then we use that to justify. So I think part of it is how we frame it. Risk, no risk. No, risk, risk. Maybe a little more risk, a little less risk, but risk, risk. Decision, non-decision. No, decision or decision. It's still a decision. So first of all, that's the first framework. I think the second is that inviting people into experimentation doesn't have to sound, again, it's all about framework. I got to take these off for a second. I got an itchy ear.
You do.
Okay, sorry about that on the podcast. I got an itchy ear. I had to itch it.
It's only in the video that it'll show.
It was bugging me. I had the itchy ear. I had to deal with it. Hopefully I don't got any ears. No, I'm good. My finger's fairly clean. I think so. That's the construct, first of all. The second piece of it is that I think if we do it well and we do it with honesty, we can do it. And this is again about framework. So I will, what I say to people about process. So even when I have a project that is really moving towards a fixed process and a predictable way we might want to do it, because we're trying to enhance the outcome while mitigating the risk of failure.
Naturally,
which, by the way, so I use an example and I say to my customers, and I always use this language, I said, the one thing I want you and I to keep in mind is that the process we're going to design is our servant, not our master. We don't serve it, it serves us. And so when we realize that it's not serving us, that's the moment that we need to embrace evolution. Because if we double down, we will actually be moving against ourselves. So I'm inviting people actually into experimentation with that language, but in a way that I think most people are going to say, well, of course, I don't want to be run by the process. So the language I choose to use ultimately it's selling them a philosophy. That process or this fixed thing we're creating or this program we're creating it's more risky if we see it as our master and that it runs us. So I think there are constructs in the way to describe things in such a way that you can bring people into it. I also know from a neuroscience perspective and research that I've done that when we use experimental language, like let's experiment with this or let's test this out, it actually triggers a dopamine release. It triggers a release of chemicals that actually reduce anxiety and the fear of risk, and it actually heightens our curious, inquisitive natures.
Is that because you're seeing failure as a more likely outcome, and so because you're expecting it, it's less scary? Is that why?
So that's part of it, but the other part of it is whether I say it or not, if I'm not inviting you to experiment, I'm inviting you to make a decision that has irrevocable outcome. Your mind immediately says, holy crap, I don't want to, there's a lot here at risk. I shouldn't make a decision. So our language locks people into fear and anxiety, actually, because if it's not an experiment, then it's a irrevocable, potentially irreparable, unrecoverable decision. Not usually the way anybody wants to approach something. Yep. Now, we never use that language, but emotionally and psychologically, that's how we hear that proposition. So good research suggests to us that when we're selling to somebody or we're making a proposition argument, if we bring them into, hey, based on my experience, this is the best way to go. But factors are always different in each environment. And so we want to, and again, I'll use that same analogy. I say, let's keep our hands open and not clenched in relationship to releasing this idea into your environment. And so this language helps me frame, I think, the wonder of experimentation. I also think it just honors the fact that this is what we're doing. Yeah. We just don't want to admit it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are experimenting because, again, you can take the most tried, proven marketing model or sales pitch or whatever. As soon as the fundamental of that script hits the practicality of the real world, there are factors which are unique in that moment and then in every moment. Because we're not releasing things into a petri dish. And so it's not controllable. And so I also think that this idea of, Adam Grant talks about it in the book, Think Again, great idea. We should be thinking like scientists. So I think that entrepreneurs, I think that sales and marketing professionals, I think in general, we need to adopt a scientific mindset, which is different than I think we think about it. We think about science as, again, irrevocable truth. But science is actually hypothesis testing, changing, evolving, and reinterpreting the data, not in the smallness of how we want it to be seen, but in the vastness that it presents ourselves to us. That's a scientific mindset. I believe this is true, therefore I created a test that I want to confirm it, but I'm open to the possibility that my experiment will actually deny my proposition or my hypothesis, and I will be challenged to come to a new conclusion. The problem is most people double down that the science experiment was wrong because their hypothesis was correct. And that makes for very foolish science.
Man, there's so much wisdom in everything you just said. One of the things that just kept coming to mind for me is a couple of years ago, I had stumbled upon Amazon, the massive company. I had stumbled upon. By the
way, my book's available on Amazon.
There you go, and his book's available on Amazon. I had stumbled upon their leadership principles, which was actually kind of interesting. And there was about 10 of them, and it was just kind of this, not real fancy page. I think they've livened it up over the past couple of years. But the one leadership principle that has stood out to me that I, for years, have not been able to get out of my head is called a bias for action. I'm sure I've probably spoken about it in a million different places. And it talks about how at Amazon, they value quick decision making because, among many different reasons why it's valuable, most decisions are reversible. And I think that that is a truth that is so easy to forget, especially in business and especially kind of at executive levels and so on. And again, I'm not at all saying, oh yeah, let's just gamble away our, grandma's life savings or what have you. But like, I think that what I believe I hear you saying, we get locked into this idea that everything is sink or swim, that every decision we make is do or die, that you cannot step out of line, that we pretend that the path to success is not littered with failure, right? This kind of circles back to, one of the things I was saying before when you're asking about what is Amplifyr, am I Aidan 6.0 right now, what have you? Like, I am continually trying to become more and more comfortable with failure and failing in public because eventually something will pay off. I have a buddy of mine, a guy I know, we went to church together years and years ago in Hamilton. He makes a living selling online courses. So he's a web developer, and in the web developer world, he's kind of a minor celebrity. And he makes a living selling courses. And these are extensive he's taught at universities, but like university level courses. And 50% of them he gives away for free, completely free, no money spent. And then the other 50%, maybe it's even only 25%, he charges much closer to what it's worth, $100 a course, which is still an absolute steal. But I had met with him one time for coffee, and I had asked him, like, how do you get into this as a career? This is so interesting. And, I knew a bit about his career, but one of the biggest things that he advised me to do if my dream was to one day, become an online influencer, educator, make courses, have a similar business model to his, is he said, try 10 different things, put them all out there. Don't spend a ton of time on everyone, but just see what gets a reaction and double down on that and throw away the things that don't work. And I'm sure at some level, fundamentally, that is what he did over and over and over. And I think that by and large, that's really good advice. And so I'm trying to, now years later, do an even better job embodying that of like, all right, cool. I have this idea for a podcast or something like that. Let's just see what happens. Let's try it out.
And it goes back even, this idea of just ship or all of these things. Like, we get so locked in, and there's another book I read, I can't remember, but it's the idea that 90% is good enough. In the sense that, do we actually get way more a result for the extra 10% that we labor 4 times as long to get? And the answer is typically not, right? So I think this again challenges the idea of perfection. Iteration is where we ought to go. I mean, I've always been into experimentation, even from a marketing perspective. Years ago, when email was just a thing, which I wish it was never a thing, but it's a thing. Can't turn the clock back on that evil little quandary. But I would always say to my customers, let's design 3 different emails. And I was always into beta testing. I said, let's measure is there measurable difference between the response? And so everything became an experiment. And I believe this is part of the problem even in marketing, is that we take one approach, and again, it goes back to it worked or it didn't.
Yep.
Well, that's, again, anybody who thinks the wisest marketing idea is put all your eggs in one basket and hope you get some chickens, a little bit problematic. So I always had this idea that we would experiment. We do this, we'll try an ad. Or if I did ads, I would do 3 different calls to action, not one. And one, I might not even have one. And in one ad, I would design this way, and this one I'd subtly design a little differently. And then we would look at and use it for market research and go, wow, well, we didn't think, but that one seems to have, for some reason, gotten more response. Of course, then we pretended we knew why, which we didn't really, but we became wiser as we went. So I've always believed in this idea of experimentation. And again, I think if you're in sales and marketing and you think you're not experimenting, I think you're the one that's deceived. And then you got to deceive your customer real hard so that they think you're not experimenting. You're experimenting. And I do believe psychologically it's just better to invite people in to the experiment. And I also believe then it dials down the kind of decision they're making. It makes them easier for them to say yes to something that has definitely less risk because it's changeable. It's evolvable, which is probably not a word, but.
Well, one of the things that I find interesting about this, and it kind of ties back to what you're saying before about elements of this being luck, right? And being situational, not existing in a vacuum, being, these elements that we can't control. What I have always wrestled with, in terms of what I do with marketing, and, I meet with friends, colleagues, what have you, and give them my advice on like, hey, if your business was my business, here's what I would do differently. There's always an element of like, that's just what I think, and you're going to have to try it out and find out for yourself, right? Early on, when I was a wedding photographer, I had bought an online course from a guy who was a local wedding photographer. He still exists. He's still, I think he's got 1 million subscribers on YouTube now, what have you. And honestly, a very solid guy and has hustled hard for the success he's had. But one of the things I remember in one of the earliest courses that he made that I bought, and again, it was like something that transformed my business and therefore my life. What he talked about was how one of the biggest, hits of success, if you will, that he had was that he had this perfect storm timing of a new wedding venue had opened up in town, and he happened to be one of the first photographers that ever shot there. This is especially when SEO, I would still argue SEO is still important, but when, before social media was a thing, he blogged about it. He had all the right SEO things, and that earned him hundreds of thousands of dollars in business. And then he became buddies with the venue and all kinds of stuff, preferred vendor. But one of his pieces of advice, I respected that he knew that that was not always going to be repeatable for his audience. But what he said was, if you ever find yourself in a similar opportunity, that is arguably the situation that changed my life. And I would encourage you, go out and do the thing. I didn't have quite that success, but that balance between, hard work and luck, I think in all of business, but in sales marketing, I think is such an interesting thing, going back to leadership even, that you can know all the right leadership principles, but depending on who you are leading, some of those are going to work and not work,
they
right?
won't work. And it goes back to, there's some really great wisdom in Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. Excellent, really great book, which, by the way, many of the companies they studied in the original book ended up failing, which caused people to sort of think the whole thing should be thrown out, which
really?
I don't agree with. Because they were just experiments. They were working and then they didn't work, and who knows. But he wrote a companion book and lots of others, but there's solid principles in Good to Great. And one of the things he talks about when you talk about leadership, which I think tucks into this idea, he said that what he called level 5 leaders, he had this looking at leaders and he saw different levels. A level 5 leader for him was someone, and he had lots of different attributes. One of the things he said is level 5 leaders, when something happens to them, or they experience something that is good and works well, they tend to look out the window of their life car and attribute it to others and to luck itself. But when something happens poorly, goes wrong, they don't look out the window. They look in the rearview mirror, and they look at themselves. And they ask themselves questions that lead them to their own accountability and how they were complicit potentially and what their responsibility in the failure might have been. They don't look outside to blame. They look inside to claim responsibility. Therefore, by the way, pulling their own power back to themselves, because the one thing I've learned over the years is that when you push accountability away from you, you actually disempower yourself. People don't realize this. So when I choose blame over accountability, I'm also choosing to disempower myself. Because if you're 100% to blame, you're also 100% responsible to fix it. So therefore, my blame of you, it absolutely disempowers me in the process. Because the less I am responsible for the problem, or believe I am, whether it's in society or in my business, then the less powerful I am to solve it. So there's a problem in the structure and construct, which really, that's been a subject that I've really tucked into for years, this idea of accountability. That's a big thing for me. And it's a big part of what I teach in leaders, and even from whether I don't do a lot of I don't do very much marketing consulting anymore. Although I do have one marketing team I still do a lot of work with, still one of my customers, and I really love that because it gives me, I feel a little bit like I feel like when I'm wearing these headphones, like I'm sort of in my basement and it's like 1972. And I got my headphones on and I'm listening to Kansas.
Kicking it old school.
When I get to talk to marketing teams, I'm like, I feel like I'm kicking it old school. And then every once in a while, I almost sound like I know what I'm talking about.
Just for a moment in time.
It's brilliant. I love it. But I do think this area of accountability is important in entrepreneurship, in sales, marketing. And I think that, again, it's so easy to stick your hand up when the campaign went well. And we got all the clicks and likes, and we increased our subscribers by and our net promoter scores went up, and we're like, oh yeah, it was all my work. It was so good. And then when something goes like pear-shaped and gets all cocked up, we're like, oh, that was market forces. They were on by market. Well, okay, hold on. Which is it here?
Yep.
So accountability is a big part of success. And we're not great at accountability in society anymore.
What do? You can decline to answer this question, or you can pivot away in a different way if you'd rather. What do you do when you are working with people, whether they are direct customers or just people you're mentoring or whatever, that like at a deep level lack that fundamental accountability and are happy to put the blame on others? How do you start to paint the picture and open someone's eyes?
Well, first of all, for me, I try to encourage them. I try to have the same conversation we just did now about how their questions are important. More importantly than questions, actually, it starts back further. It's their conversations. So I have this fundamental belief that it's the conversations I have in my head and I have with others that actually begin the process that creates an environment of accountability. I would see fundamentally as conversation as an enabler of accountability. It enables accountability to be more present. When I have a better conversation with myself or of you, which is around accountability, that goes back though to the other D is I do believe that conversation is propelled and predicted by the questions we ask. So that's where questions come in, but it's more on the conversation side. And so I encourage them, and I'll ask them questions that will make it harder for them to let themselves off the hook.
Okay. How do you do that?
Well, questions that sound more like this, and I try to be kind, but not too kind. It might sound like this. So, Aidan, is there any possibility that you have any responsibility for the current problem you're experiencing? And then I allow them to...
You just like creak the door open.
Correct. And then I allow them to think. And then if they're not going where I will go, I might say, so what if I could propose to you that you are partly responsible for the situation because you had agency and you made this decision 2 years ago. And is it possible that if you didn't make that decision 2 years ago, you wouldn't be encountering this today? See, another thing I think about accountability is connected to agency. So the greater sense of agency we have, or sense of self-determination, See, we love self-determination when it works for us, but self-determination means it is exactly that. It's the ability to determine your experience as self, which means that we are responsible at some level for our experience at any given moment because of choices we make. Now, I don't like that, by the way. I mean, I've had situations in business where I've endured certain consequences, because all choices have consequences, good or bad. And I've endured certain consequences, and when I've endured them, it is very easy to adopt wasn't me. I have no part to play in this. But then when I'm really honest, if I'm very honest with myself, which again is usually aided by Scotch and Scars, I say, actually, if I really honest with myself, I could have done this differently, which would have helped me avoid this. Therefore, I'm not just a helpless victim. I feel victimized, but I'm not a helpless victim. In fact, I had agency. I just didn't understand the consequences or implication of the decision I was making at the time, of course. But that doesn't mean that I didn't make a decision that ultimately had some complicit nature in the outcome of the situation. I actually think that's really wonderful for me, because at that moment, I become more empowered. Because now I can say, I can change the future by making a different decision. That's agency. So I think these things are all connected, and I think accountability is a big part of business. And we forget these things.
What you're describing, that kind of, that poor me mentality to that, okay, maybe I did have some role in that. To go from that place to that place, you talked about, journeys not necessarily being linear. Yeah. Totally fair. I've heard, someone describe in like a spiritual context that, the length of time between when you sin and when you repent, the shorter that gets, the more, grown up and mature and responsible you are. How do you, and how quickly do you go from poor me, this is completely out of my hands, I could never have seen this coming, I'm screwed, this sucks and the world hates me, to, oh, okay, maybe I did have something to do with this. And like, how does one, so even for someone like you who, likes accountability or likes the idea and explored the idea of accountability quite intently, because what you're describing is deeply personal to you, right? How do you pep talk yourself from being in the miserable place to the responsible place?
So I think for me, I've learned to embrace that first feeling of victimization and frustration.
Embrace it.
Anger maybe, but to contain it and limit it.
How?
So part of it is I give myself a certain amount of time to be super pissed.
Okay.
At everybody but myself. And then I say, okay, I'm done now. So we have seasons tickets to the Kitchener Rangers. And I love the coach's philosophy about wins or losses. So he has a philosophy that the team, after every game, the team members gets 5 minutes to celebrate the win or to bitch about the loss, and then we move on. It's a containment strategy, and I think it's wise. I think that if you take a strategy that I failed if I got frustrated, I failed utterly if I felt like a victim and everybody else pissed all over me and I wasn't the cause, and we expect ourselves never to have those feelings, and then we probably predict our own failure, because it's not true human. We have reaction.
I agree.
So, but what I've learned over the years is to give myself time to utterly just be venting, vicious, catty.
Is that in your head? Do you journal?
Oh,
do
sometimes
you do
it's
this
in my
with a
head.
person?
Sometimes I write it down. Sometimes I just go in the basement and scream at my dog.
Okay.
That's why he needs therapy. Could be that.
What's your dog's
poor
name?
Jackson.
Jackson.
But I've learned to just get it out. Okay.
Okay.
And literally like a break room where you break things or scream would be a good idea. But I think the idea that you're not going to feel those feelings, I think you got to feel those feelings, but you got to contain them. And so I think it's okay to give yourself a few minutes. Again, I think everybody's different. If you can do it for an hour and recover, great. If you can't, if 5 minutes is too long and you can never get your head out of that, probably too long. People have to decide that. But for me, I know I'm going to have a reaction. So, I mean, again, think about it. It's like you stick your hand into something, you get burnt, you immediately have a reaction. You sit back and say, well, that's sore, let me fix it. And, oh, maybe I shouldn't put my hand in there again. That was kind of stupid. So you take responsibility eventually, but in the beginning, it's the flame's fault, right? Who lit this fire? Oh, I did. All those things you go through, it's like, who turned the stove on? Well, I did, because we're making dinner, right?
Yep.
Right. So you have this moment of total, I have no idea who in the universe did this until you go, oh, shoot, it was me. Right. And then you start embracing your accountability. But I do think it's about a containment strategy.
Well, a very personal example of that for me, earlier this week, was it this week? Yeah. We took our family photo for our Christmas photo. And
by the way, they are the best photos. And every time we get the Hennebry's photo, my wife says, by the way, I hate you, Aidan Hennebry, because every time my wife gets this card in the mail, she goes, why can't we take a great family photo like that? And I'm like, we're not the Hennebrys.
There you go. That's
sorry to interrupt, but I have pain over these photos.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, not sorry. Pam, you have my number. You can just text me. We'll arrange something. I'll help you out. I now have 4 kids, which is great. And 4 kids and 2 adults is a lot of people to wrangle into one selfie where everyone is, approximating something close to a smile and looking at the camera. And so I can't remember the first time we had tried it. I think we had done some photos earlier in the day, and it was like, oh shoot, we forgot about this. And so we ran out. We came out to the doghouse this year to do our family photo, and my kids were not having it by this point. They had done great earlier in the day. They were not having it there, and so they were frustrated. And then I got frustrated, and okay, forget this. We're not doing this. Whatever. We'll try.
Canceling Christmas.
We're canceling Christmas. And so then. And one of the most beautiful, convicting things ever is my daughter, my 5-year-old daughter. Oh my gosh, it messes me up. She goes, Dad, I'm sorry that you're having a really bad day. And I'm like, I'm not having a really bad day, but I was overly and irrationally emotional about something that truly does not matter. So that's been an incredible mirror reflected back to me of how my conduct is, how my kids are perceiving my conduct. So that's really great. But the experiment. So then the next day, it was time to go back out for family photos, or to try the Christmas card photo again. And as we were putting on everyone's shoes to come out to the doghouse, I said, okay, everyone, we're going to be happy this time. And then I thought to myself, and I said aloud, I said, even Daddy, because I had to admit, I succumbed to the misery, right? There was no winning it. And so it was dumb of me to have conceded that I was going to allow myself to express that frustration in front of my kids. And, are there healthy ways to do that? I don't think a parent should never fight in front of their kids, or that kids should never see their parent emotional. But certainly the amount of frustration that I expressed over something very trivial, like a Christmas card, right? Yeah. But again, it was that moment to say, everyone's going to be happy this time.
Everybody.
Including me.
But I love what you're talking about, because I think a lot of wisdom just does come from children.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? And so, maybe part of the wisdom of how do you deal with this stuff comes from kids. I mean, kids have this propensity to absolutely lose their shit. And then 2 minutes later, we're like, hey, Johnny, come on, let's go get a popsicle. Yep. Seriously, we should be like this. Because we're
mood swingy.
Adults just can't get over shit. They just we get lost, right? And I do think, again, whether it's accountability, whether it's recovering from a failed marketing campaign, again, if you bring it into your psyche, that's one thing. Again, it's a difference between saying I'm a failure and this failed. It's a big difference.
Huge, monumental.
Right? And I will say, over the years, I struggled with this years ago. I fundamentally saw myself as a failure. I came from a broken home. It was very shattered. There was a lot of stuff. And, again, because I'm older now and I've learned a few things, but, I dealt a lot with self-hatred when I was a kid. I did not like myself. I hated myself. And it wasn't just I didn't like myself. I mean, I used to write in a book over and over again. Like when you write lines on the board. I wrote a lot of lines on the chalkboard at school. But when I got into difficult situations as a child, I had a book that I wrote in, and I would write, I hate Tim Windsor over and over again. So I personalized every failure to my own psychological detriment. The one thing I've learned over the years, and I often say it to people, and this is another thing when I talk about contextualizing experience, I say, failure is the price of having a belly button. If you got a belly button, you've screwed up. And what people don't realize is when I say things like that, or I'm willing to embrace experimentation and failure, is that that's not my natural disposition. My natural disposition and my nurture was towards self-hatred when anything was and any mistake was made. I still struggle today when I make a mistake. I don't like it. When I publish a book and after it gets published, you realize there's a mistake in it or two. That is painful for me, and it assaults my psyche about perfection. So again, if you're listening in, please don't think like I got it all figured out, because this is why I did a podcast a long time ago that I said everybody needs a coach and a therapist, and I believe both of those things. If you're in business, you need a coach. You also need a therapist. You need people who can help you process things, help you get out of your own way. I think employees, this is why if you've got that coverage in your EAP program, you ought to use it. It's not weakness, it's strength. We've been taught for many years. I mean, my generation was taught that getting therapeutic help is weakness. I believe it's the strongest thing a person can do, because when you get into that kind of world, you have to deal with your shit, and you have to be honest about who you are and who you're not, who you want to be and who you can't be, or whatever. So I do think that all of this is part of the journey. And what I love about this conversation is we've gone in 1,000 different directions, which is great. But I think that's also what real life is like. If you have linear conversations just all about sales and marketing and promos, and you're not having the human part of the conversation, which delves into the critical psychological impact of failure, because campaigns don't fail, it feels like we did. And so these are highly personal things. And when you're a solopreneur or a small company, you're putting so much of your heart and soul into everything you do that it feels, and it is, deeply personal. So putting up enough emotional walls between your success or your failure, I think, is important, because if we take on too much of our success into our persona, then we are unnaturally needing that fix all the time. If we take on too much failure into a persona, then we're constantly berating ourselves. And this is where I think it comes back to just understanding that we're wonderfully human and deeply flawed. And in what we do, the problem is we live in a world that is expecting us to create things that is potentially wonderfully human, but never deeply flawed. And I think this is a problem. And I think this is, again, the admission that, hey, this is my best thinking today, or this is an evolution, or and sometimes I'll say, going back to your point, how do I bring people into this world? There are times where I'll say to people, I'm going to say something right now that years ago I wouldn't have ever said, or I would have taught the opposite. But what I've come to understand is there's another way to look at this. Something I said was only one way to look at 10 years ago when I encountered you is no longer the way I see that, and I'll share my journey of change, because that normalizes evolution. I listened to a podcaster, Rob Bell, who I appreciate a lot, and had Rob on my show one time. And Rob has this wonderful way of doing things. Rob's gone through a lot of personal evolution over the years. Anybody who knows Rob's story would know that. We won't get into it, and there's times where Rob is confronted by somebody with something he wrote, because he's been a New York Times bestseller for a long time. And at one point was considered, one of the closest people to Oprah from a spiritual perspective in Oprah's life. And so there's things that he said or wrote or did, and today he fundamentally doesn't believe that. And he's had to reconcile those two things, because he reconciled in the beginning by saying, oh, I was wrong, I didn't believe that, which isn't the truth. He did believe it. So he has this wonderful saying of when somebody says, "But you used to say this," he'll chuckle and say, "Yeah, you're right. Oh, that was 10 Robs ago." Yeah. And I really like that idea because there's evolution. That was 10 Tims ago. That was 5 Aidans ago. That was 3 iterations of this marketing piece ago. That was version 1.10 of 40 of the website ago. And this is also just makes it more human. We're constantly evolving and changing. And I think we dishonor it by expecting perfection out of the gate. So I think it's important.
I think what you were hitting on there is what I think is one of the most compelling lessons that all leaders especially should learn. And I mean this, again, in my world is especially prevalent in sales, marketing. It's not just limited to leadership. The separation within your identity of like what you do and who you are and where you find your value, right? And I mean, obviously myself as a born-again Christian, I find my sense of identity and self-worth in who or what I understand as the way that God views me, right? I, have worked with all kinds of different people, some of faith, some of not. And I think the thing that it can happen to anyone, faith or no faith, when you associate exactly what you're saying, your success or your failure as the equation of how you are valued as a person, that's an incredibly dangerous thing. Whether you are wildly successful or wildly unsuccessful, I'll say, because I like what you said earlier. And again, it's tied into this idea, the distinction between I have failed and I am a failure. And, in my time as a leader of people, I've tried my best anyways to coach some of my employees through that, of really understanding that distinction of like, we need to be able to say that you have failed, but we need to understand that that does not make you a failure, and to challenge your own thinking. When you get into things like I hate Tim Windsor, I'm going to believe that at some fundamental level, you've embodied that you are a failure, not just that you've failed, 100%. Right? And I think especially for leaders, when you're in some sort of position of authority, and especially when it's over people, the reason that is so vital is because, you hold so much more influence on the people around you. And I think, honestly, I'm going to maybe even challenge what I just said and zoom out a little bit, because whether you're in a position of authority at a workplace or not it's discrediting the impact that you have on the people in your life. And I can't remember where it was. I think it was at a Christian men's conference or something like that. And they were encouraging these men to step into accountability and ownership, and then frankly stop being lazy bums, and to say like your family, your friends, the people around you, your coworkers, they need you to be the best version of yourself that you could be. And it was absolutely the opposite of a guilt trip. It was a call to arms. It was an encouragement that, you have a tremendous amount of influence on the people around you, whether or not you want it, right? Some of this goes back to, this saying that I've heard, it might not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. I think that there's so much wisdom in that. And of course, can these things be misapplied? Of course, everything I've said could be misapplied. But I think by and large, in sales, in marketing, in leadership, in any of these things, that there's so much value in making a distinction. And I love what you're saying, Tim, not just that you can own your successes and push away your failures. No, you need to have a healthy relationship to both of those things. And I think that is just such a powerful thing to tuck into.
It's what I love about your podcast. My podcast has a certain sort of place it sits, but it also doesn't sit, which is one of the problems with my podcast. It sits everywhere. I get people who say, "Hey, I could get you a $10,000 sponsorship, but you just have to pick a lane." And I say, "You don't understand me. I'm not a lane picker, so I'm not in a lane." But what I love about your podcast, because you have this idea where you're talking about sales, marketing, leadership, all this, but actually all of those really at their core, and maybe the core of this conversation, which is organic in nature, unplanned, which makes it even more delightful. It's about the human experience, which is one of imperfection. It's about this, that, And again, if I look back, maybe 13 Tims ago, for instance, because some of the people who know me and some people who don't, and the longer I podcast, the more I pull back the onion layers that are Tim. So I have a similar heritage or history in relationship to a faith understanding that Aidan does. And it doesn't mean I've totally unmoored myself from all of those things, but but there are some really interesting sort of sacred texts. And one of them I think about in this area, which I often quote to myself a lot because I find it very, very healing and hopeful. And it's where it's in the New Testament, and the Apostle Paul is writing about, dealing with his own humanity, which was marred, and the humanity of others. He uses this analogy. He says, we have this treasure in earthen vessels, so that the surpassing greatness can be seen as coming from God, is the term he uses. Again, if you're listening in, that may not be the language that makes you feel good, so you can substitute whatever you want for the sake of just hearing. What's interesting to me is that in the original text, the Greek, at least the Greek translation, the term that's translated earthen pots is actually cracked pots. It's actually broken pots. And this actually is something that Leonard Cohen speaks about when he writes a song. He talks about how the light actually comes through our cracks. So I think that this is the problem in business. I think it's a problem in life. I think it's a problem in marketing. It's a problem in sales. It's a problem in everything, is that we want to pretend that we have no cracks. But I actually think that what lets the light shine out, real transformative, when you think of light in its essence, it's the expression of energy. It is the thing that, breaks the power of that which is opaque and dark. Interpret that any way you want. But the reality is that those flaws in ourselves, those flaws in the campaign, they let the light out. And I think we live in a society and culture that is so aching for light, but so unwilling to be the broken vessel that wants to transmit it. We want to have it all done and dusted. We want to have it all figured out. We want the Christmas card to be perfect.
All the kids smiling.
Which is lovely. But I think, and maybe this is part of just for me getting a little bit older and more comfortable myself, maybe, I don't know, but man, I love to encounter other people who have cracks. Because it makes me hopeful. And that's the problem with social media, because you don't really get lauded for your cracks. You don't, we Photoshop this, we airbrush that. On some of my pictures on social media, I may have actual pectoral muscles. No, I don't. We don't Photoshop any of that, but I think there's a real principle here for all of us, and whether we're leading or following, which we're always doing at one level, whether we're creating campaigns, making marketing material, designing sales processes, starting businesses that we're trying to bring to fruition, maybe just a little bit on more understanding that to let the real light shine through, that it shines through imperfection. I think that's what I hear in the wisdom of Paul in that. And I think it is beautiful, wonderful. And Cohen who, by the way, I found out recently, has spent time as a monk recently, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, very fascinating. Again, I think he's tucked into something so powerful. And so I guess, if I think about this conversation, it's a great encouragement to strive for excellence while understanding that perfection is impossible at everything you do. Okay, we shouldn't use this as an excuse not to strive for excellence.
Absolutely not.
But we should strive for excellence, contend for it, even potentially encourage to require it at times, while understanding that excellence is not perfection, and that the space between the two is where true humanity ought to live and dance. And that's something I'm going to be more comfortable with into the future.
Well, and to me, that just brings us right back around to when we're talking about AI and how AI, if we're talking about pots, like AI will iron out any blemish or any hint of, again, something that bears the mark of its maker, right? It creates this mosaic, I suppose, of information that you feed it, but it's this kind of false reality, and it's hollow, and it really it lacks soul, for
Yes.
maybe lack of a better word, but I think all of that, all of this whole conversation, Tim, summarizes why I love doing business and life with you, my friend, because
I love it too.
your approach is so deeply human to what you do. And I love, you've really shaped the way that I see business problems and to dig deeper, and I like how you talked about, again, your evolution of kind of starting in marketing and then going to sales and leadership, and why, you continually zoomed out and you're looking for the root cause of something, and you want to, not deal with a symptom, but deal with the sickness at times. And I think that, again, there's just so much wisdom in there. As we slowly...
Hey, before we...
Okay.
Let me just speak to my audience for a second. So listen, if you haven't tucked into Aidan's world, and by the way, you better spell Amplifyr, because it's some weird marketing...
It's
What are you doing?
Amplify, so Amplify, and then the letter R on the end. Amplify.
Breaking all marketing convention.
The advice I give people is don't spell, a business name or a name or anything weirdly, and I went and did it.
There you go. So don't listen. So Aidan, don't do what he says.
That's right.
Hire him, but don't do what he says. But if you haven't tucked into Aidan's world on his podcast, you should. They're really wonderful conversations with deeply, deeply practical entrepreneurs who are trying to figure it out, and I appreciate that. Again, just really appreciate it. And I will say, again, if you haven't if you're in Aidan's world and never come into my world, shame on you. No, I didn't.
Absolutely.
Just kidding. What I'd like to say is that, I had the privilege of doing a podcast episode with Aidan and Leanne, and those people who follow on Commodify would know this. And I was looking at it just for fun, just to see. So of all the, by the time this co-releases, I'll have released over 200 episodes. And I don't imagine this will change, but the second most highest listened to podcast in all of the 200 plus.
No joke. Okay.
Yeah, is the one that I did with you and Leanne.
That's wild.
The one that outpaces it still a little bit is a conversation I had with my friend Craig Minchin, who I adoringly call my leadership historian. And it was a conversation we had about Indira Gandhi, which was amazing.
Okay.
So you are just above, just so you know.
I appreciate
just
that.
above her, just below her. Sorry, not above. Not
Yeah.
Below. But what a great conversation that was. And again, speaking of, this deep humanity and dealing with life, and these are the macro themes. But listen, I'm going to pretend I'm not in control of this anymore, because I like to be in control, and I'm going to leave it to Amplifyr Aidan to bring this into for a landing the way that you'd like it to, because I think we've talked for like 6 hours now. Just kidding.
I mean, yeah, it feels
time.
that way. I know my bladder certainly would indicate.
I might have to do a 3 episode release, but it's a great conversation.
Well, and again, Tim, I'll use this as an opportunity to publicly thank you and to say, man, the way you've just transformed my thinking about all these things, and that of your son. You also have great offspring that have also
That's
taught
Pam.
me
That's Pam.
awesome
Remember.
Okay, so Pam, ultimately, if we're going back to the root causes of things, Pam, thank you
What
for
a beautiful womb.
beautiful. I know. I look at my kids and I go, Leanne, thank you for giving me 4 of the most beautiful children I could ever have dreamed.
Chris isn't that beautiful. Let's not get carried away.
I don't know. You guys look a lot alike, so I don't know.
I know exactly what I'm saying then.
Well, Tim, it's been a pleasure, man. I would love to revisit this with you someday. I mean, we can, again, there's 1,000 different ways we could have taken this conversation. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for coming to the doghouse and hanging out. Yeah, hanging out with the dogs, being a dog today.
I love the doghouse. Is it D-O-G or D-A-W-G?
I know. I feel like I've broken your heart by spelling it properly. The one time I did spell it properly was D-O-G. Then it's not D-A, but
I get it.
it's full of dogs.
It's good.
A-Ws.
I love it.
Thanks, Tiff.
Thanks, man.